They're not confused. Confused people ask questions. These people take notes. Let that sink in for a second. Because if someone is watching your moves this closely, replaying your silence, tracking your timing, studying your patterns like a case file, it's not curiosity. It's fear wrapped in obsession. They are not trying to understand you. They are trying to predict you. And failing at that is driving them insane. Think about it like this. Imagine someone standing in front of a locked safe, convinced the problem isn't the lock, but that they just haven't tried hard enough yet. So they press their ear against it. They twist the dial slowly. They memorize every click. They write down patterns that don't exist. Meanwhile, the safe isn't broken. It's just built for a different owner. That's you. And they're standing there sweating, realizing no matter how long they study, they don't have the code. Here's the part that should make you sit up straight. Studies in behavioral psychology show that people only begin obsessive pattern watching when they lose control over an outcome they expected to dominate. In simple words, nobody studies someone this hard unless that person slipped out of their grip. That's not admiration. That's panic. That's the moment power quietly changed hands. And thank you, chosen one, for being here. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing like and subscribe. That small action helps spread this message to more souls who are waking up and wondering why the room feels different around them lately. This isn't just content, it's a signal. And by staying here, you're part of a growing force that refuses to be predictable, controllable, or small. Thank you for being part of this mission. Now let's come back to the truth they don't want you to hear. Welcome on board, chosen one. Step in and get comfortable, because this is about to expose some people who were very confident they had you figured out. These are the same people who once labeled you as predictable, easy to read, nothing special. The same people who spoke about you with certainty, like you were a solved problem. Funny how those voices are quiet now, replaced with late-night scrolling, silent watching, and nervous overthinking. Look closely at what's happening. They're checking your timing. They're analyzing your silence. They're replaying old conversations, looking for clues they missed. They're trying to connect dots that were never meant to form a picture for them. You didn't become louder. You didn't announce anything. You didn't explain yourself. And that's exactly what broke their confidence. When they said you would break, you didn't. When they said you would fall apart, you adapted. When they laughed, the universe waited patiently, then flipped the script without warning. Now the joke is landing, and they're not laughing anymore. They thought you were a background character, someone simple, someone whose reactions they could predict, someone who would always respond the same way. And now they're treating your life like a crime scene, zooming in on every pause, every move, every shift in energy, trying to understand how the person they underestimated became impossible to read. Here's what changed, and this is important. The air around you shifted, not because you did something dramatic, but because you stopped feeding expectations. The silence that follows you now isn't emptiness. It's tension. It's the kind of silence that shows up when people realize they no longer know where they stand with you. The same people who once walked toward you confidently now whisper about you from a distance. They trade theories. They compare notes. They try to decode your mindset like you're an unsolved case. And this didn't start yesterday. You've been like this your whole life. Even when you were younger, people sensed something they couldn't name. They called it weird. They called it quiet. They called it distant. What they were really reacting to was depth. You were observing while they were performing. You were learning while they were talking. You were storing information while they were wasting energy trying to be seen. They assumed silence meant weakness. They didn't understand that silence in the hands of someone self-aware becomes a weapon, someone who doesn't rush, someone who doesn't explain, someone who doesn't react on command. That kind of person cannot be controlled, and that terrifies people who rely on patterns to feel powerful. There is always a moment in a chosen one's life when the world realizes it misjudged the wrong person. That moment doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives quietly after years of pressure, disappointment, and unseen endurance. It's built in the nights you held yourself together when nobody checked on you, in the days you learned people by watching them, not trusting their words, in the moments you adapted instead of collapsing. You learned something most people never do. You learned how humans move when they think they're in control. You learned how they speak when they're lying. You learned how they act when they think no one is watching. And because you didn't brag about what you knew, they assumed you knew nothing. Now look at them. They're running mental simulations about you. Why didn't you reply? Why did you pull back? Why does your energy feel different? Why do you seem calmer, sharper, harder to reach? They ask others about you like you're a puzzle that refuses to solve itself. And here's the part that keeps them stuck. The more they study you, the less sense you make to them, because they're trying to find patterns in someone who reinvented themselves every time life tried to break them. They're studying an old version of you while the current version has already moved on. You became unpredictable the moment you stopped needing validation, the moment you stopped explaining your choices, the moment you realized your power was never in proving people wrong, but in walking away while they were still trying to understand you. That's why they're watching. That's why they're obsessed. That's why they're frustrated. You didn't disappear. You didn't hide. You simply evolved in a direction they don't have access to. They know something important, even if they won't say it out loud. You are outgrowing the version of you they were comfortable with. You are done shrinking, and the universe is quietly rearranging pieces in your favor while they're still staring at the board, trying to crack a code that was never written for them. And from this point forward, everything they thought they understood about you keeps falling apart. Not because you're playing games, but because you stopped playing theirs. Stay with me. What comes next explains exactly why studying you will never work, no matter how hard they try. And hey, chosen one, pause here for just a moment. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels alert, like your focus just sharpened, that's not an accident. That's awareness kicking in. People who are predictable don't get studied. People who are easy don't get watched. The fact that they're tracking your moves, replaying your silence, and trying to decode your behavior means one thing. You slipped past their control, and now they're scrambling to catch up. So, before we go any further, anchor yourself here. If this message feels accurate, if you've noticed the stares, the sudden curiosity, the strange energy shifts around you, drop 777 in the comments. Not for anyone else, for yourself. It's a signal that you're aware of what's happening and you're not backing down. And if you can, support the team behind this message with a super thanks. It doesn't matter if it's small or big. What matters is momentum. These messages exist because people like you choose to keep the truth moving forward. Every bit of support fuels this mission and helps push this signal to more people who are waking up and wondering why the room feels tense when they walk in. Now take a breath. We're about to go deeper, step by step. And trust me, if you are who you think you are, you'll feel the pull to stay until the very end. Let's get started. Number 1. You stepped sideways and their whole playbook exploded. They didn't lose you because you disappeared. They lost you because you stopped moving where they expected. That right there is the gut punch. That's the moment everything flipped. They didn't see it coming because they were too busy watching the version of you that no longer exists. They built confidence on the idea that they knew you, your habits, your reactions, your limits, and the second you stepped sideways instead of forward, their entire mental system crashed. They called you predictable right before their predictions stopped working. That's not coincidence, that's timing. The humiliation for them isn't that you changed who you are, it's that you stopped dancing to the rhythm they thought they set. They thought life handed them the remote control to your behavior. Then, one quiet move proved the batteries were never in their hands. Let's clear something up, because this question always shows up in the mind of a chosen one at this stage. Am I being inconsistent? No, you're being intentional. There's a difference, and they don't understand it. Inconsistency is random. What you're doing is controlled movement, strategic silence, chosen pauses. You don't move because you're lost. You move because you see more than they do. Think of it like this. They memorized the route you used to take every day and thought that meant they owned the map. But you were never walking blindly. You were learning the terrain. So when you changed direction, they weren't confused because you moved. They were confused because they never realized you had options. That's why they feel stupid now, not angry first. Stupid because they invested time studying a version of you that expired. They took notes on reactions you outgrew. They labeled behaviors that were temporary. And now they're holding outdated information, trying to apply it to someone who already upgraded. Here's the part that really messes with them. You didn't announce the change. You didn't explain it. You didn't justify it. You just stopped responding the same way. You stopped showing up on cue. You stopped reacting on demand. And the moment you did that, the illusion of control evaporated. They keep asking themselves the same questions on loop. Why didn't they react this time? Why didn't that work? Why do they seem calmer now? Why does it feel like I'm behind? What they don't realize is that the game didn't speed up. You just stopped playing on their level. They studied you like an equation. Input plus pressure equals reaction. That formula worked when you were surviving. It stopped working when you started choosing, and instead of getting chaos, they got something worse. Precision, silence, timing they couldn't read. You didn't become unpredictable to confuse them. You became unreadable because you stopped giving free access. Big difference. And that's what terrifies people who rely on predictability to feel powerful. When someone can't forecast your next move, they can't prepare for it. When they can't prepare, they panic. Let's talk about the labels for a second, because you know they tried. Quiet, emotional, distant, difficult, detached, confident, cold. Every label was an attempt to box you in, to shrink you into something manageable. But labels only work on things that stay still. You didn't. Every time they thought they finally understood you, you shed that layer. Every time they said, "This is who you are," you proved it was just a phase of your evolution. And that's not chaos, that's growth. Growth looks messy to people who stopped moving a long time ago. Here's another question that comes up in your mind. Why does this bother them so much? Simple answer. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. You stopped being easy. The moment you stopped reacting emotionally on schedule, they lost leverage. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, they lost their script. The moment you stopped needing approval, they lost their grip. And now they're stuck watching someone they can't steer anymore. They replay your past, looking for clues. They analyze your silence like it hides secrets. They examine your timing like there's a message encoded somewhere. And the irony is brutal. There is a message. It's just not for them. You move with purpose now. Even when you look still, there's a reason behind the pause, a reason behind the distance, a reason behind the shift. You don't move when you're confused. You move when you're clear. And that clarity scares people who depend on control more than noise ever could. Picture this. Someone builds a trap based on your old habits. Same triggers, same patterns, same reactions. And then you walk right past it. Not because you saw the trap, but because you're no longer the person it was built for. That's what's happening. They're setting strategies for a ghost. And here's the part that should make you smile a little. The more they try to predict you, the faster you evolve. Not out of spite, out of alignment. You're responding to life, not to them. While they're stuck analyzing who you used to be, you're quietly becoming who you were always meant to be. They hate that they can't pin you down. They hate that they can't categorize you. They hate that every time they say, "I know exactly what they'll do next," you don't. Because it exposes the truth they don't want to face. They never understood you. They just got used to an old version of you. And you didn't betray anyone by changing. You outgrew the role they assigned you. That role was small. That role was convenient. That role required you to stay the same so they could feel smart. You don't owe anyone that comfort. You're not chaotic. You're adaptive. You respond to energy, not expectations. You shift when the environment shifts. You change direction when something feels off. That's not instability. That's intelligence. And people who lack it call it unpredictable because it makes them feel safer. Here's the truth they'll never admit out loud. They're not mad that you changed. They're mad they can't keep up. They're mad the version of you they studied doesn't exist anymore. They're mad their notes are useless. Their theories are wrong. Their confidence was built on bad data. You didn't explode their playbook by attacking them. You did it by upgrading yourself. Quietly, efficiently, without permission. And now they're left staring at the board, realizing the move they never saw coming wasn't loud, dramatic, or aggressive. It was simple. You stopped moving where they expected. That's the power, and this is only the beginning. Number 2. They're not trying to know you, they're trying to steal you. They don't ask questions to understand. They ask questions to copy. That's the gut punch they don't want to hear, because confusion sounds innocent, but obsession is calculated. And what you're dealing with right now is not curiosity. It's hunger. They're not staring at you, trying to learn who you are. They're staring at you, trying to figure out how you became what they failed to become. Let's clear the fog immediately, because a lot of chosen ones hesitate at this stage and start doubting themselves. Am I overthinking this? No. People who want to understand you listen. People who want to steal from you study. They watch patterns. They note reactions. They ask questions that feel harmless but are timed too well. They circle back to your past, your pain, your turning points, not out of care, but out of extraction. Here's the ugly truth. They want access, not connection. They want the version of you that survived storms. They would have quit the moment things got uncomfortable. They want the calm you earned without carrying the weight that created it. They want the glow without the healing, the confidence without the collapse, the crown without the nights you questioned whether you'd even survive. Think about it like this. Imagine someone staring at a finished sculpture, running their hands over the smooth edges and asking, "How did you make this?" But they're not interested in the years of chiseling, the broken tools, the dust in your lungs. They just want the final shape. That's what they're doing with you. Every conversation wasn't conversation. It was data collection. Every "how did you handle that?" wasn't empathy. It was reconnaissance. Every compliment was followed by a silent note. Every personal question was another attempt to reverse engineer your evolution. And here's what messes with their head. There is no formula. You weren't built in a lab. You weren't designed through a checklist. You were carved by pressure, loss, silence, betrayal, and decisions nobody clapped for. You didn't wake up one day powerful. You became powerful because life kept pushing and you refused to disappear. Let me give you a clear image. Imagine this. Someone finds a diamond and thinks the magic is in the shine. They don't see the years it spent under crushing pressure. They don't see the heat. They don't see the darkness. They just want to sparkle. That's them. And they don't realize that if they were put under the same pressure, they'd shatter. Here's another one. Imagine someone watching a marathon winner and saying, "I want that endurance." But they never woke up early, never ran in the rain, never trained alone. They want the finish line without the miles. That's how they look at you. You can feel it, can't you? The way their questions feel slightly off, the way their interest spikes when you're doing better, the way they disappear when you're quiet, then reappear when your energy shifts. That's not coincidence. That's someone trying to sync themselves to your rhythm so they can imitate it. And you might be asking yourself, why do they want my blueprint so badly? Because blueprints give people shortcuts, and shortcuts give people the illusion of power without growth. They don't want to walk their own path. They want to hijack yours. Here's the part they'll never admit. Understanding requires humility. Stealing requires entitlement. They don't want to sit with their own flaws long enough to grow. They want to bypass that process by copying the output of someone who already did the work. Let's say it plainly. They want your mindset, but not the loneliness that built it. They want your intuition, but not the heartbreak that sharpened it. They want your discipline, but not the seasons where nobody believed in you. They want your boundaries, but not the pain that taught you why boundaries were necessary. Imagine this, someone trying to wear armor they didn't forge. It looks impressive from a distance, but the moment pressure hits, it collapses, because armor only works for the person who learned how to build it, piece by piece. That's you. Another image. Someone copies your handwriting, letter for letter, but they don't know the language. They can mimic the shape, but not the meaning. That's what happens when people try to imitate your energy. They get the surface wrong because they don't understand the depth. And here's the quiet satisfaction in all of this. Even if you handed them everything, every lesson, every habit, every mindset shift, they still wouldn't become you. Because you are not information. You are experience. You didn't read your way into this version of yourself. You lived your way into it. You lost things. You let go of people. You sat alone with uncomfortable truths. You rebuilt yourself without applause. That kind of growth cannot be downloaded. This is why their obsession turns bitter, because the more they study you, the clearer it becomes that what you have can't be stolen. They can mirror your silence, but theirs feels heavy. They can copy your confidence, but theirs cracks under pressure. They can repeat your words, but they don't land the same way. Here's a hard quote for them. You can copy behavior, but you can't copy becoming. They want your strength, but they don't want the scars. They want your clarity, but they don't want the confusion you had to walk through to get there. They want your peace, but they're not willing to sit alone long enough to earn it. And you might wonder, why now? Why are they suddenly so interested? Because people don't envy you when you're struggling. They envy you when you survive, when you rise, when your growth exposes their stagnation. Imagine this. Two people start at the same line. One laughs, one trains. Years later, one stands on a podium while the other asks, "How did you do it?" That's not curiosity, that's regret. Your evolution became their mirror, and instead of facing themselves, they're trying to borrow your reflection. Here's another quote that hits hard. They don't want your life, they want the version of themselves they could have been if they had your courage. They underestimated you when you were quiet. They dismissed you when you were learning. They assumed you'd stay beneath them. What they didn't plan for was your rise, exposing how little they evolved. That's why they watch so closely now. That's why they mimic. That's why they study your timing, your habits, your words. They're trying to crack a code that isn't logical, because your growth wasn't logical. It was earned. And here's the final truth that seals it. You were carved, not copied. You were shaped by experiences they avoided. You were built in places they ran from. You became you through endurance, not strategy. So let them study, let them take notes, let them obsess over patterns that don't repeat. They will never replicate what you are, because you aren't a blueprint, you're a result. And results, like you, can't be stolen. Number 3. You left the room and their mind never followed. They don't miss you. Missing is quiet. This is loud, messy, and obsessive. That's the truth they choke on. What's happening in their head isn't longing, it's spiraling. Missing someone means accepting distance. Obsession means refusing to accept that the story moved on without you. And that's where they're stuck. You walked forward. Their mind stayed behind, pacing in circles, replaying scenes that no longer exist. They replay conversations like security footage, pausing on moments they thought were meaningless. They analyze your silence like it's hiding a secret message meant just for them. They read captions twice, then a third time, convinced there's a signal they're failing to decode. They line up every new person they meet next to the memory of you, and every comparison ends the same way. Nobody measures up. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Here's the part that drives them deeper into the spiral. You're not watching, you're not checking, you're not waiting for reactions. You moved on cleanly. And nothing breaks someone faster than realizing the person they can't stop thinking about stopped thinking about them a long time ago. Imagine this. Someone stuck in a burning building, screaming your name while you're already outside, breathing fresh air, walking away without looking back. That's the imbalance. You escaped the fire. They're still convincing themselves it's just smoke. They confuse obsession with connection because obsession is all they have left. You were once a mirror that reflected their importance back to them. Now that mirror is gone, and they're forced to sit alone with their own thoughts. And they don't like what they hear. Here's a hard truth for them. Obsession begins where control ends. The moment you stopped reacting, explaining or chasing, their sense of power collapsed. They don't crave you. They crave the version of themselves that felt significant when you were paying attention. Another image. Imagine someone constantly refreshing a page that no longer updates. Every reload brings disappointment, but they keep clicking anyway. That's their mind, stuck in a loop, waiting for movement that isn't coming. You're no longer operating for validation. You're not performing. You're not curating yourself to be understood. You're moving with clarity, with self-trust. On a level their insecurity can't reach, because insecurity needs feedback to survive. They spiral because you don't. They obsess because you're silent. They analyze because you're at peace. And the most brutal part is this. You didn't trap them in that loop. They did, by underestimating someone who knew exactly when to leave the room and never come back mentally. That's not heartbreak. That's withdrawal from relevance. Number 4, they meant to dissect you and ended up exposed. They thought they were watching you. Turns out they were watching themselves fall apart. That's the moment the balance snapped. They started this thinking you were the subject, the puzzle, the thing to be examined and figured out. Somewhere along the way, without warning, the whole case flipped. The spotlight turned. And suddenly, you weren't being studied anymore. You were reflecting. That's what shattered them, because a mirror doesn't attack. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't argue, it just shows. And what they saw in you made it impossible to keep lying to themselves. Your confidence didn't make them angry, it made them uncomfortable. Because confidence like yours isn't loud or needy, it's settled, it doesn't beg for permission. And that calm certainty throws a harsh light on people who are still trying to convince themselves they matter. Your boundaries did the real damage, not because they were cruel, but because they were clear. You didn't over-explain. You didn't negotiate your worth. You simply decided where access stopped. And the second you did that, their lack of boundaries became painfully obvious. They realize they say yes when they mean no. They tolerate what they resent. They fold where you stand firm. And that comparison eats at them. Here's the truth most of them won't admit. Nothing angers an insecure person more than someone who doesn't need approval. Your peace is what really exposes them. You're not rushing, you're not proving, you're not reacting to every little thing. And that quiet stability forces them to face the noise inside their own head. Imagine this. Someone standing in front of a mirror they can't turn off, watching every flaw they've been avoiding while the reflection stays calm and unchanged. That's what your presence does. You don't shame them. You don't confront them. You simply exist as proof that another way of living is possible. Another image. Think of someone walking barefoot on hot ground, watching you cross the same path with steady steps because you learned where not to step. They don't hate the ground. They resent that you learned. They don't envy your success. Success feels distant, abstract. What they envy is your freedom, the way you move without fear of judgment, the way you say no without guilt, the way you walk away without explaining yourself into exhaustion. And here's the part that hits hardest. You didn't take anything from them. You didn't win against them. You simply stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. And in doing that, you became the reflection they cannot escape. Not because you're better, but because you're free. Number 5. The secret code they'll never steal because it was written in pain. They keep looking for a shortcut, not realizing the path almost killed you. That's the mistake they will spend a lifetime making. They assume there must be a formula, a mindset hack, a clever strategy you memorized while they weren't paying attention. Something clean, something repeatable, something they can copy and run like software. What they refuse to accept is this simple truth. There was no plan. There was survival. You didn't build yourself in comfort. You didn't design this version of you in safety. You were shaped under pressure they would have escaped from at the first sign of discomfort. That's why they keep staring at the result and missing the process. They want the shine, but they don't want the weight that created it. Imagine this. Someone picks up a diamond and asks how to make it sparkle, completely ignoring the fact that it only exists because it survived pressure intense enough to destroy almost anything else. That's you. And that's where their logic breaks. They think strength comes from intention. Yours came from endurance. Here's the part that frustrates them most. There is no shortcut to becoming someone who didn't quit. You didn't think your way into this version of yourself. You stayed alive through moments that forced you to adapt or disappear. You learned because you had to. You grew because there was no other option. They want your calm, but they don't want the nights where your mind almost collapsed under its own weight. They want your clarity, but they don't want the confusion that stripped everything false away. They want your confidence, but they don't want the seasons where you stood alone with no reassurance and kept going anyway. Picture this, someone trying to copy battle scars by drawing lines on their skin, thinking that's where the strength comes from. They don't understand that scars mean nothing without the fight behind them. That's how their imitation looks. Empty, fragile, Exposed. Another truth they avoid. You didn't learn this in theory. You learned it in moments where the universe didn't rescue you, where no one explained anything, where you had to choose who you were going to become without guarantees. That's why they can study you forever and still never crack the code, because the code isn't information, it's lived experience, and lived experience cannot be stolen. You are not a strategy. You are the result of pressure survived, and that is the one thing they will never be able to recreate. Number 6. You walked off, and they started dancing for attention. The moment you stopped watching, they forgot how to stand still. That's the switch they never expected. For a long time, they were the observers, the judges, the ones leaning back, acting untouchable, acting like you were the one being measured. They watched quietly, confident that you were still orbiting their awareness. Then something flipped. You stopped looking, and suddenly they were the ones scrambling to be seen. Now they perform. Every post feels louder. Every caption feels forced. Every move looks calculated. Not because they found confidence, but because they lost relevance. And nothing terrifies an insecure person more than realizing the person they underestimated no longer needs their attention. Here's the part that stings the most. You didn't do anything dramatic. You didn't announce your growth. You didn't call anyone out. You simply elevated. And when you did, the spotlight moved with you, leaving them exposed on a stage they never prepared for. Imagine this, someone mocking a performer from the audience, convinced they'd never trade places. Then the lights flip, the crowd turns, and suddenly they're standing alone on stage, blinking, unsure what to do with their hands. That's them, unrehearsed, overexposed, nervous. They used to act like they didn't care. Now their entire online presence is a performance aimed in your direction. They time posts, they adjust tone, they exaggerate confidence, they hope something lands, anything, just to pull your attention back for a second. And here's the cruel irony. You're not even watching. You're not scrolling for them. You're not decoding their messages. You're not reacting. You're living, growing, moving forward. And that silence hits harder than any response ever could. Another image. Imagine someone shouting into a microphone that's no longer connected. The sound doesn't echo. The crowd doesn't react. But they keep shouting anyway. Louder, faster, desperate. That's what their performance looks like now. You didn't steal the spotlight. You earned it by outgrowing the need for one, and that's why it followed you. Power doesn't chase attention. Attention chases power. Here's a truth they can't escape. When you stop performing, insecure people panic, because performance needs an audience, and you took that away. They're not glowing, they're compensating, they're not confident, they're loud. And the switch is permanent. You stepped off the stage, they're stuck on it. Number 7. Your rhythm broke their machine. They don't analyze you to understand, they analyze you because the controls stopped responding. That's the real malfunction. They tell themselves they're studying your behavior, but what they're really studying is their failure to manage it. Every pause you take, every shift you make, every time you don't respond the way they expected, something short-circuits in their head. Not because you're random, but because their system only works on people who stay the same. Let's answer the quiet question forming in your mind. Why do they call me inconsistent now? Because predictability is how they feel powerful. When someone moves the same way every time, they can be anticipated, guided, steered. You stopped doing that. And the moment you did, their confidence collapsed. You're not inconsistent, you're adaptive. Big difference. Inconsistency is panic. Adaptation is awareness. You read the room. You feel the energy. You adjust your distance, your tone, your timing. You don't move based on habit anymore. You move based on information, and that makes you impossible to load into their mental software. Imagine this: someone built a machine designed to sort objects by size and shape. Then you drop in something that changes form every time it's touched. The machine doesn't break because you're wrong. It breaks because it was built too simply. That's what's happening to them. Another image. Think of a chess player who memorized openings but never learned how to read the board. The moment the game deviates, they freeze. That's them. They studied patterns, not intelligence, and you stopped following patterns. Here's a quote that lands hard. They don't fear unpredictability. They fear losing the illusion of control. They try to map you, track you, predict your reactions, but every time they think they've got it, you respond differently. Not out of chaos, but out of growth. You are no longer reacting from old wounds. You're responding from clarity. And clarity looks threatening to people who depend on leverage. Another metaphor. Imagine chasing a shadow that changes direction with the sun. The faster you run, the more ridiculous you look. That's their obsession now. They want you to act the same so they can feel smart again. They want repetition so they can regain footing. But you've evolved past being readable. You don't owe anyone consistency at the cost of your peace. Here's the final truth. You didn't break their system, you outgrew it. And systems built on control always malfunction when they meet someone who moves with awareness instead of fear. That's not chaos. MCP. Number 8. The moment control died and fear took its place. They're not scared of losing you. They're scared they were never in charge. That's the fear gnawing at them now. Not heartbreak, not regret. Panic, the kind that creeps in slowly when someone realizes the power they thought they had was imaginary. They didn't lose influence over you. They discovered it never belonged to them in the first place. Here's what actually happened. You stopped reacting, and the second you did, the entire structure they relied on collapsed. Their plans, their pressure tactics, their emotional bait, all of it depended on one thing: you responding on cue. When that stopped, they had nothing left to stand on. You didn't argue, you didn't explain, you didn't defend yourself. You simply withdrew your energy, and that silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. Imagine this: someone pulling on a rope, convinced the resistance means control, only to fall backward when the other person lets go. That's them. They mistook tension for authority, and when you released it, they crashed. They're afraid because every strategy they built was designed for an old version of you. The reactive one, the emotional one, the one who still cared enough to engage. That person doesn't exist anymore. And now they're holding weapons that don't fire, maps that don't match the terrain, rules that no longer apply. Here's a hard truth they won't say out loud. People who fear losing control never had it. They only had access. You revoked that access, quietly, cleanly, without drama. And that terrifies them because they don't know how to respond to someone who can't be pulled. Another image. Think of someone trying to steer a car whose engine has already been removed. They turn the wheel harder and harder, confused when nothing happens. That's their panic. They keep trying old moves, old tricks, old pressure points, and nothing works. They don't fear your absence. They fear your independence. They fear that you're no longer emotionally reachable. They fear that you're no longer adjustable. And you might wonder, why does this shake them so deeply? Because control was the only thing making them feel secure. When you took it away, you exposed the truth. They were never powerful. They were just familiar. You didn't break their control. You outgrew it. And now fear is doing what power never could, eating them alive from the inside. Number 9. When control fails, they start lying to themselves. When they can't touch you, they rewrite you. That's the meltdown. Not loud at first, not obvious. It starts quietly, inside their head, the moment they realize you didn't crack, you didn't fold, you didn't break the way they rehearsed. And when reality refuses to cooperate, insecure minds do what they always do. They invent stories. They label you because labels feel like cages. They build theories because theories feel like answers. They throw around explanations, diagnoses, character profiles, anything that gives them the illusion that you're still within reach. Not because it's true, but because truth would force them to accept something unbearable. You escaped. Here's the ugly part. These stories aren't about you. They're about control. They changed. They're cold now. They're calculated. They think they're better. Each sentence is a bandage slapped over a wounded ego. If they can define you, they can shrink you. If they can explain you, they don't have to face the fact that you outgrew them. But here's what breaks their narrative. You didn't disappear. You evolved. And evolution looks like abandonment to people who stayed the same. Imagine this. Someone swinging at air, convinced the target must still be there, only to realize they're shadowboxing a memory. That's what their meltdown looks like. They're reacting to a version of you that already expired. Another image. Think of someone trying to trap smoke in a jar. The harder they grip, the more ridiculous they look. That's their obsession now. Every theory leaks. Every label falls apart. Because you're not present in the way they need you to be. Here's a quote that lands hard. Stories are what powerless people use to feel powerful again. They say you're distant because they can't reach you. They say you're guarded because they lost access. They say you're unpredictable because you stopped explaining yourself. None of it is insight. It's frustration dressed up as intelligence. And here's the truth they refuse to face. They're not studying you anymore. They're studying a ghost, a memory, a version of you that existed when you still engaged. The real you moved on without leaving instructions. That's why nothing they say lands. That's why their narratives keep changing. That's why their explanations contradict each other. They're chasing something that no longer exists. You didn't disappear to confuse them. You evolved to protect yourself. And that's the part their meltdown will never solve. Number 10. The file stays open because they never leveled up. You're not a mystery. You're a mirror they never trained to look into. That's why this case never closes. Not because you're hiding something, not because you're complicated, but because they never evolved enough to understand what they're looking at. They keep telling themselves you're unsolved, when the truth is much simpler and much more humiliating. You're clear. They're behind. They mistake authenticity for mystery because they only know how to perform. Their entire world runs on masks, scripts, and roles. Say the right thing, act the right way, react on cue. That's how they survive. So when they meet someone who isn't acting, someone who isn't adjusting themselves to be liked or understood, their brain short-circuits. Here's the question that quietly bothers you at this stage. Why do they keep overthinking me? Because realness feels threatening to people who built their identity on pretending. Your honesty doesn't just stand out, it exposes. It highlights every fake laugh, every forced confidence, every rehearsed response they've been hiding behind. Imagine this. Someone who only knows how to wear costumes walks into a room where everyone else is just themselves. They don't feel inspired, they feel naked. That's what your presence does. You don't call them out. You don't accuse. You simply exist without pretending. And suddenly their performance feels exhausting. Another image. Think of someone trying to solve a puzzle that isn't broken. They keep rearranging pieces, convinced something must be missing, when the truth is, the picture is already complete. They just don't like what it shows them. Here's a quote that hits hard. People who live behind masks think honesty is a trick. They read into your silence. They overanalyze your calm. They assume strategy where there is clarity, because they can't imagine moving without an agenda. They can't imagine peace that isn't fake. So they label you mysterious instead of admitting they don't know how to be real. And this is where the case truly dies. Not with answers, but with acceptance they'll never reach. You didn't lock the file. You didn't hide the truth. You simply stopped explaining yourself to people who never planned to understand. You are not unsolved. You are unapologetically clear, and they are unevolved enough to mistake that for something dangerous. Number 11. They bet on your collapse and lost everything. They waited for you to fall apart. What they got was proof they never understood you. That's how their entire script dies, not with drama, not with revenge, with disappointment so deep it rattles their identity. They sat back, confident, patient, almost excited, waiting for your breakdown like it was scheduled. They read your silence as weakness, your distance as defeat, your shifts as signs of collapse. They were so sure the pressure would finish you. They never considered one thing. Your breaking point already happened, and it didn't destroy you, it forged you. That's where they miscalculated beyond repair. They were studying your patterns like analysts waiting for a system failure, not realizing the system had already rebooted at a higher level. The pain they thought would end, you had already passed through you and done its work. What walked out of that fire wasn't fragile, it was refined. Imagine this. Someone stands outside a volcano, taking notes, waiting for it to explode so they can say, "I knew it." But the eruption already happened years ago, underground, reshaping the land into something stronger and unrecognizable. Now, all that's left is solid ground they can't crack. That's you. They thought your silence meant you were barely holding on. In reality, it meant you had nothing left to prove. They thought your calm was suppression. It was clarity. They thought your withdrawal was collapse. It was alignment. Here's the truth that humiliates them. They prepared for your ending. You prepared for your next form. They don't know what to do with that, because their entire sense of intelligence, control, and superiority was built on predicting your failure. When that failure never arrived, everything they believed about themselves fell apart instead. Another image. Imagine someone rehearsing a victory speech for years, only to realize the competition already finished and they didn't qualify. That's their realization. Late, quiet, brutal. You were never the mystery. You were always consistent in one way. You adapted, you learned, you survived. They were the ones guessing, projecting, inventing theories to avoid facing a simple truth. They never understood you because they never did the inner work required to understand someone like you. And now the ending is locked in. You walk forward untouched, not angry, not bitter, not chasing closure, just moving on, lighter, clearer, unburdened, and they stay behind, flipping through mental files, replaying moments, chasing patterns, trapped inside an investigation that never had a solution. Because the case wasn't about you, it was about them failing to accept that you evolved beyond their reach. And this is where we close it. If you're still here, it means something clicked. Not because this was dramatic, but because it was accurate. You saw the pattern, you felt the shift, and you recognized yourself in it. That matters. So press the like button if you haven't already. It helps this message reach others who are waking up and wondering why the energy around them feels different. And if you're not part of this family yet, make sure you press the subscribe button. This space is for people who refuse to be predictable, controllable, or small. Stay sharp, stay aware, keep moving forward.